Hey everyone, welcome to Plants and Politics. So they said it would happen. They said it would, and some of you doubted it. Admit it. You doubted that Trump was going to be indicted. Or not Trump, but the Trump organization. Well, it happened. It happened. Woo, woo. Yep. Okay. Yesterday, the Trump organization and Alan Weisselberg, his CFO, they were both indicted, the corporation and the man. They were indicted by a grand jury and charged with crimes just yesterday. They unsealed the indictment this afternoon. And understand, this means that a jury of their peers reviewed the evidence in this case and said, yep, these crimes were committed. Based on the evidence, we believe that these people should be indicted, that you should move forward, you should charge them with crimes. So Weisselberg turned himself into the authorities this morning. He was handcuffed, led into court. Now Trump himself hasn't been charged. Let me make that clear. He has not been indicted. He has not been charged. It's just the Trump organization. But everyone I've heard, everything I've read basically says that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is akin to a mob investigation. And you start with the lower level or mid-level employees. You see if you can flip them, put enough pressure on them to flip on the boss. And if not, you keep moving up the food chain. So here's what Weisselberg and the corporation have been charged with so far. I read through the entire indictment. I pulled out all the relevant parts, so I'm going to share everything with you guys. So they have been charged with, number one, a scheme to defraud in the first degree, conspiracy in the fourth degree, grand larceny in the second degree, 3 counts of criminal tax fraud in the third degree, 1 count of criminal tax fraud in the fourth degree, 4 counts of offering a false instrument for filing in the first degree, 4 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. And it states that Weisselberg and the Trump organization conspired since 2005 to defraud the IRS and essentially you and I, especially, taxpayers in the state of New York. So authorities say that Weisselberg concealed almost $2 million in benefits that he received from the company, but didn't report those perks as taxable income. Now, this includes rent for his Manhattan apartment. All of his utilities were paid throughout this time, his internet, his cable TV bill, payments for his phone, payments for the lease on not just a car for him, which was a Mercedes-Benz. I'm not talking about, just your average run-of-the-mill car. The company was paying for a Mercedes-Benz for Alan Weisselberg and another one for his wife. And then there were tens of thousands of dollars in tuition payments for his grandchild's private school. And in fact, Trump actually signed the checks for those tuition payments himself. So he can't say, oh, well, Alan did that and I had no idea. And the Manhattan District Attorney's Office contends that these perks amounted to secret pay raises so that Weisselberg and others, yes, there's others, didn't have to pay taxes on these items, obviously. And also so the Trump organization didn't have to pay payroll tax on any of that money. So the DA also claims that this money was disguised. It was basically written into ledgers as rent payments, or they didn't even bother to report it. They also allege that the Trump organization failed to withhold income tax on wages, salaries, and bonuses, as well as other types of compensation. In addition, even though Weisselberg lived in this Trump-paid New York City apartment almost exclusively, apparently he even defrauded the taxpayers in this way because he concealed the fact that he was living in New York City so he could avoid having to pay New York City taxes. So the Trump organization also failed to pay New York City taxes out of each of his paychecks. And Weisselberg even lied to his tax preparer. He pretended that he didn't live in New York City. Up until 2013, he pretended that he lived in another home that he owned. Another item that I noted in the indictment was an indirect payment of cash to Weisselberg. So apparently, the Trump organization was cutting checks, in fact, over $29,000 in checks, to another employee for some reason. And then that employee would go and cash those checks and hand the money to Alan Weisselberg. However, the Trump organization wrote that that money, these checks that went to this other employee, but was secretly for Weisselberg, they listed that on the ledger as holiday entertainment. So apparently this was always around Christmas time, and they're saying that Alan Weisselberg would use this money for, I guess it was like tips or something, gratuities. There were also payments for other personal expenses and items, not just for Weisselberg, but also for, it said, one of his children, which I'm assuming is his son, Barry. He's the one who was married to Jennifer, who's been all over the airwaves lately, and she's been working with the prosecutors. She is definitely a scorned woman, so not a good thing, guys. But apparently the Trump organization would purchase other items. So they would purchase like beds and flat screen TVs. They would buy carpet for them, furniture, things like that. And the indictment specifically mentions an apartment for Weisselberg's child, which was paid for by the Trump organization. And then it goes on to mention 2 additional employees who received substantial amounts of compensation for rent and auto leases. They don't name names. They don't tell us who these people were, but they do say that these employees also purposely failed to report their residency as New York City. So they were doing the same thing that Weisselberg was in pretending that they lived in a different city when in fact they lived there and they should have been paying taxes there. The indictment also cites end-of-year bonus payments for executives. So this is really big. These were paid to employees, so to executives of the Trump organization, but through other entities. So for example, they would pay Weisselberg a bonus, but instead of paying that bonus out of the Trump organization and listing it as employee compensation, they would instead pay them under the name of like Trump International Golf LLC or Mar-a-Lago or one of his other entities. And then they would report it as non-employee income. So this is a big deal because this, as they noted, allowed the employees to claim this money as self-employment income. Here's why that's such a big deal. Weisselberg was using this money to make large donations to a Keogh pension. So that is for self-employed people, as specifically for self-employed people, which he was not ever. He was always an employee. So they say from 2012 to 2016, Weisselberg contributed approximately $215,000 to this Keogh, and it's now grown substantially into a much larger sum than that $215,000. And when you contribute to these plans, it reduces your taxable income. And then that money grows tax-free. So you don't pay taxes on it until you retire and until you take that money out. So he was getting money that was being paid to him in an illegal manner. He's not a self-employed person. And then he was making contributions to a self-employed person's type of retirement account, taking that write-off. This in and of itself is illegal. And I would imagine too, although they don't mention this, but I'm just assuming that this was a benefit to this. But my guess is that these employees who receive this so-called self-employment income, could then also write off bogus expenses on their tax returns, right? They write off these expenses, these business expenses, and then it reduces their taxable income overall. And the Trump organization wouldn't have to take taxes out of these checks either, because they were paid through a 1099, like you pay a independent contractor or self-employed person. So it sounds like there's going to be several other Trump employees who will be indicted next, unless they agree to cooperate, or unless one of them has already agreed to cooperate, has been cooperating, and maybe that's how they were able to receive and obtain all of this information. I don't know. Now, here's the other thing I found. The indictment mentions unindicted co-conspirator number 1. Sound familiar? Kind of sounds like Michael Cohen's indictment, right? With the whole Stormy Daniels hush money thing. And it states that this person agreed to and implemented a compensation scheme with Weisselberg and others. So that definitely sounds like Donald Trump. I don't know. I have no proof of that, but yeah, I don't know who else that could be, since he calls all the shots at his organization. I mean, everybody knows that. And there's also this little nugget that was buried on page 16. And this relates to some of the charges with Weisselberg trying to falsify documents. It states that on or about September 2016, Weisselberg directed an accounting department staff member to remove notations, quote, per Alan Weisselberg from the general ledger. And this was in regard to those tuition payments for his grandkids. So apparently in the ledger, they had a notation saying that these payments were going to whatever it was per Alan Weisselberg, and he asked them to remove that note. So consciousness of guilt much? Right? He knew what he was doing was wrong, and he was trying to cover it up. And here's the deal. It's not like Weisselberg was hurting. He really did not need to figure out ways to keep a roof over his head, or, he wasn't struggling. This guy was not hurting. His base salary, according to this indictment, was fixed at $540,000 a year. So just his base salary was over $500,000 a year. On top of that, he had a fixed bonus of $400,000 a year. So the guy's making already almost $1 million every single year, fixed amount, not going to change. How fucking greedy are these people? So here's the thing. What happens if Weisselberg refuses to flip? I was a little more concerned about that before I read this indictment, and I'll explain why in just a second. But if Weisselberg refuses to flip, then they're going to move forward with this prosecution. And if he's found guilty, even if he doesn't go to prison, let's say they don't give him jail time over it, he's still going to have to pay all of this money back, plus interest, plus penalties. I mean, this is going to be pretty huge. It's a big chunk of money, because according to the indictment, since 2005, he should have paid nearly $567,000 in federal taxes alone. So over $500,000 in federal taxes. He should have also paid over $106,000 in state taxes and over $238,000 in city taxes. In addition to that, he received tax refunds. He received almost $95,000 in federal tax refunds, and he received over $38,000 in state refunds. This is a guy whose base pay is almost $1 million a year, and he's receiving this amount of money back. Money which he was not entitled to receive. If that was legitimate, if they just took an exorbitant amount out of his paychecks and that was a legitimate amount and he was reporting all of his income, fine. He deserved it. That was his money to get back. But he's totally scamming the system. They estimated that he was receiving approximately another $100,000 in benefits every single year that was not taxed whatsoever. So that money did not belong to him, those tax refunds. And people wonder why taxes in New York and taxes in general are so freaking high. It's because of this. It's because of these liars and thieves like Weisselberg, like the Trump organization. They are exactly why we can't have nice things. It's why law-abiding, hardworking citizens like you and I cannot have nice things. And yet we all pay tons of taxes. We pay through the nose. And yet when we ask for anything, we're treated like the redheaded stepchild because, oh, there's no money to go around. In the meantime, these guys are getting away with this stuff. So as for the Trump organization, the fact that it's under indictment could destroy him financially. Okay, that's what his attorney was fighting so hard to prevent. That's why he kept meeting with the DA's office and he kept trying to talk them out of filing these charges.
I don't care.
Womp womp and thoughts and prayers. I mean, he's ripped off so many people throughout his entire life. He's harmed so many people. One guy committed suicide because Donald Trump destroyed his life and his business by refusing to pay him and dragging him through court. But as we all know, Trump is leveraged to the hilt. He's leveraged beyond belief. He owes hundreds of millions of dollars to lenders. And there could be provisions, there could be clauses in those loan agreements which require that he immediately repay them, like the full balance, if the company is indicted. We don't know that for sure, but that's something that's been floated by people that, because these banks, they already knew that Trump was a huge risk. Given his proclivity and his history of skipping out on payments and suing lenders until they just finally give up and walk away, they knew what they were getting into, but they took a risk. And, he's just a shit human being. He really is. I mean, he's such a leech on society. He is the complete opposite. For everything that Republicans talk about, he is the complete opposite of personal responsibility and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Are you kidding me? He's had everything handed to him his entire life, including his money. And yet he just screws everybody over and refuses to pay his bills. He is such scum. So if Trump goes bankrupt again, these lenders are screwed. They know they're not getting a penny out of him. And I have to say, like I alluded to earlier, I was a little concerned that the DA was trying to hang this entire case on just Weisselberg. But now that I've read the indictment, it seems pretty clear that they're either going to also indict other employees at the company, which would put pressure on them and possibly make one of them flip, or they already have threatened that and some of his employees are already working with them. So, that provides other inroads, that provides other means of getting to Trump, getting someone to, belly up to the bar and take a plea and a cooperation agreement, like I said, if they haven't already. So this has to make Weisselberg nervous because reading this indictment, you now know they've got the goods on other people. And so he has to know now that if he doesn't act fast, somebody else could beat him to the punch. Somebody else could make that first deal. And the first to flip usually gets the best deal. Because if they've already got information from one source, why do they need to give a plea agreement to somebody else, right? Why would they let Alan Weisselberg off the hook when he wasn't willing? All these months, he basically gave him the middle finger and said, no, I won't help you. So if someone else has the goods on Trump, Weisselberg is going to be SOL. Now, here's what gives me hope. more hope, I should say. If it was just an indictment based on payments for perks, I'd say that's probably too flimsy, because they could just make the case that, oh, those things were, they weren't compensation. Donald Trump is just such a generous person, which we all know is full of shit. But they could try to make that excuse, right? They could say, oh, he's just so generous. Those were just favors from a friend. They weren't actually in lieu of compensation. Now, we all know that's bullshit, but they could try that in court. And the fact that those payments were made from the corporation, from the Trump organization, and not from Trump personally himself, it makes it a hard sell, but they could still try it. They could still float that idea and see what happens. But when you couple all of that, all these payments, with the checks that were cashed and then the money was just handed to Alan Weisselberg, and then the really big one, the bonuses that were paid as non-employee compensation, and Weisselberg's use of retirement plans, to benefit him in retirement when he's not a self-employed person. Those things are pretty damning, because it's so obviously fraudulent. It's so obviously a lie. And they knew that it was a lie. That's why Trump didn't cut those checks out of the Trump organization. That's why he purposely, they're all being paid out of the Trump organization. And then those bonuses, for some reason, are paid from Mar-a-Lago or Trump International or, one of these other corporations. It's obvious. It's obvious they were trying to hide it. And then the fact that he told an employee to change the ledger, that's really significant, at least in my non-legal mind, because it does show consciousness of guilt. It just shows that he was trying to hide stuff. And gee, what a shock that it was September of 2016 as Donald Trump was running for president. I think the timing kind of says it all. But anyway, guys, that's what we know for now. I will definitely keep you posted, but this is such good news. I wish this was a Friday, because then we could really celebrate. But we could celebrate on a Thursday. It's okay. And there may be more good news tomorrow. There was a lot of good news today. So keep it rolling. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. Take care. I will talk with you soon.